The content in this video is based on factual, real-life events and public records. All opinions expressed are for educational and documentary purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised, as some scenes may depict sensitive content. This video is intended for informative purposes and complies with YouTube's guidelines. Behind the towering walls of Atlanta Penitentiary and San Quentin State Prison lies a hidden world shaped by violence, survival, and the pressure of history. These institutions have witnessed riots, escapes, political turmoil, and the darkest moments of human behavior, yet also resilience, brotherhood, and the fight to stay sane in places designed to break the mind. As we uncover the stories buried inside these prisons, we explore how extreme isolation, overcrowding, and decades of brutality reshaped the psychology of the people who live and work within their walls, revealing truths that the public rarely sees. If you enjoy real, gripping prison documentaries and true stories, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with your friends and family. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss more shocking and exclusive content. Atlanta Penitentiary and San Quentin State Prison stand as two of the most defining landmarks in the American correctional system, monuments of stone, steel, and unresolved history. Their walls have witnessed more than a century of riots, political upheaval, gang wars, and human suffering, shaping the conversation about punishment in the United States in ways few other institutions ever have. Atlanta Penitentiary opened its doors in 1902 with the goal of establishing a more civilized federal system. Yet from its earliest years, the prison became known for overcrowding, violent discipline, and the psychological strain of long-term confinement. By the 1920s, the facility held political prisoners, bootleggers, and organized crime figures. Later decades brought civil rights activists, high-profile escape attempts, and some of the most destructive riots in federal prison history. Every era left behind psychological scars on inmates and staff alike. Atlanta became a symbol, a place where reform was promised, but trauma was often delivered instead. San Quentin, older and even more infamous, carries a legacy soaked in violence, executions, and some of the most dangerous criminal networks in America. Built in 1852, the prison evolved into a fortress of fear, hosting death row, massive racial tension, and the rise of prison gangs that still influence national crime patterns today. Yet San Quentin is also the site of groundbreaking rehabilitation programs, journalist-run inmate newspapers, and psychological studies that helped expose the emotional toll of incarceration. The contradiction defines the institution, brutal history on one side, human resilience on the other. Together, these prisons shaped public perception of American justice. Their stories, real riots, real deaths, real escapes, real reforms, forced the nation to confront the consequences of long-term confinement. Inside their cells, thousands of men learned how pressure can warp the mind, how isolation can break it, and how hope can survive even in places designed to crush it. These two institutions are more than just prisons. They are psychological battlegrounds where the human mind is tested every single day. Life inside Atlanta Penitentiary has always been defined by a constant undercurrent of pressure, an invisible weight that settles on everyone who enters. Former inmates often describe the atmosphere as heavy, almost physical, shaped by the long hallways, the echo of metal doors, and the knowledge that the outside world is impossibly far away. Even in its earliest decades, the prison earned a reputation for harsh conditions, but over time the psychological strain became its defining feature. Inmates speak about the sound before anything else, the endless clanging of gates, the rapid footsteps of officers, the sudden alarms that turned ordinary days into moments of panic. Every noise reminded them that control was not theirs. The prison population changed over the decades: bootleggers, political prisoners, drug traffickers, gang members, but the emotional environment remained the same. Men learned to watch every expression, every movement, because misreading someone could spark violence. Atlanta Penitentiary was a place where the wrong word could turn a quiet cell block into chaos. The 1987 Cuban detainee uprising stands as one of the most intense psychological events in American prison history. For days, inmates seized control of parts of the facility, barricading offices and taking hostages. The fear was shared by detainees and staff alike. For the detainees, the threat of deportation to a violent political climate. For the officers, the uncertainty of surviving long enough for negotiations to succeed. That incident left behind deep emotional trauma and forced the nation to confront what desperation looks like when it reaches its breaking point. But even outside of major uprisings, everyday life in Atlanta created its own mental battles. Overcrowded tiers amplified tension, pushing inmates into conflicts they didn't always want. Many men survived by shrinking emotionally, speaking less, avoiding eye contact, eating quickly and silently. Others coped by forming alliances, sometimes with people they would never associate with on the outside. The psychology of survival at Atlanta often meant becoming someone different, someone harder, someone more alert than any human being should have to be. Correctional staff also carried psychological weight. Officers walked the tiers with a mix of authority and apprehension. Each shift brought the possibility of assault, manipulation, or hostage situations. The constant exposure to aggression and crisis shaped their identity, often blurring the line between vigilance and fear. Many staff members described leaving the job, but never fully leaving the stress behind. Atlanta Penitentiary remains a place where the past is still alive, etched into the walls, preserved in the stories of men who lived through it, and remembered by families who waited outside. It stands as a reminder that prisons do not simply confine bodies. They confine emotions, histories, and the mental battles that shape a person long after release. San Quentin State Prison has always been more than a correctional facility. It is a psychological battlefield where every inmate, officer, and staff member must negotiate with fear on a daily basis. Unlike many prisons that hide their past, San Quentin wears its history openly. Its stone walls, narrow cell blocks, and aging corridors carry over a century of stories of violence, reform, death, and resilience. The moment someone steps inside, the environment begins shaping their mind in ways they cannot fully control. For inmates, the first shock is the noise. Voices overlapping from tier to tier, metal echoing through concrete, alarms piercing the air with unpredictable frequency. This soundscape keeps the nervous system in a constant state of alert. Men describe sleeping lightly, waking at the faintest movement, and learning to interpret every shout as either a warning or a threat. San Quentin trains the mind to anticipate danger even when none is visible. The prison's most psychologically charged space has always been its death row. For decades, inmates lived not only with confinement, but with the awareness that time itself was their executioner. Conversations carried a different weight there, more reflective, more somber, sometimes more desperate. Even inmates far from death row still felt the presence of that wing as a shadow over the institution, a reminder of how final the system could be. Officers assigned to that area often struggled with emotional exhaustion, balancing the duty of control with the emotional reality of watching men prepare for the end. San Quentin is also known for powerful inmate hierarchies, subtle and overt systems of control that influence everything from who shares a cell to who controls contraband. Survival often depends on understanding these invisible lines. A misplaced word, a refusal to follow a custom, or simple misunderstanding could escalate into violence. Many inmates speak of developing an internal radar, a psychological tool that helps them predict conflict before it happens. This hyper-awareness protects them physically but drains them mentally, creating a state of chronic tension. Yet, San Quentin is also a place where transformation occurs. Programs like the Journalism Guild, the Insight Prison Project, and the artistic workshops give inmates rare opportunities to process trauma, express emotion, and reconnect with their humanity. But even these moments carry emotional complexity. Men often feel torn between personal growth and the need to maintain a hardened exterior for survival. Showing vulnerability can be dangerous. Still, many describe these programs as lifelines, small openings in an otherwise suffocating environment. Correctional officers face their own mental battles. They navigate a place where danger is constant, where interpersonal conflict can shift in seconds, and where one mistake could cost a life. Many describe developing a dual self, the calm professional on the outside and a tense, hyper-alert person on the inside. The psychological toll follows them home, affecting families, sleep patterns, and emotional stability. San Quentin ultimately exposes the fragile line between control and chaos. It forces men to confront not only the dangers around them, but the fears within themselves. It remains one of the most psychologically studied prisons in the world because every person who enters, whether inmate, staff, or visitor, leaves with a changed mind, shaped by a place where history, violence, and humanity collide every single day. The Atlanta Federal Penitentiary has long been one of the most scrutinized prisons in American history, not because it is the oldest or the largest, but because its story is marked by unrest, daring escapes, and psychological pressure that shaped generations of inmates. Walking through its thick, fortress-like walls feels like stepping back into another era, one where the line between punishment and endurance has always been razor-thin. Every hallway, every steel door, every silent watchtower carries memories of events that pushed both inmates and staff to their breaking points. For those incarcerated here, the first impression is the sheer scale of the facility. Its massive stone exterior looms over the grounds, creating a sense of insignificance in anyone who enters. Inmates describe a sudden psychological shift the moment they hear the gates close behind them, a feeling of isolation so strong it almost feels physical. The long corridors, lit by rows of flickering bulbs, amplify even the smallest sounds, turning footsteps and distant conversations into haunting echoes. This sensory environment heightens paranoia and keeps the brain in a state of constant vigilance. Throughout the early and mid-20th century, Atlanta Penitentiary became known for its unrest. Riots and uprisings were often rooted not just in physical conditions, but in the emotional erosion caused by overcrowding, prolonged tension, and the absence of outlets for expression. One of the most significant uprisings left deep psychological wounds on both prisoners and staff. Inmates trapped inside smoke-filled cell blocks described the panic as overwhelming, an uncontrollable blend of fear, anger, and helplessness. Officers, forced into emergency response mode, carried the emotional weight of navigating chaos while trying to prevent the loss of life. Even decades later, former staff still recall the moment the alarm echoed through the building, knowing instantly that nothing would be the same after that day. Escape attempts from Atlanta Penitentiary became their own legend. Some were reckless, some carefully orchestrated, but all stemmed from the emotional pressure of confinement. The psychological drive to escape, sometimes described as desperation to regain control over one's life, became a defining theme of inmate behavior. Men tunneled through walls, pried open windows, disguised themselves, or attempted bold daylight runs across the yard. More often than not, these attempts ended with heightened security, harsher conditions, and a deeper sense of futility among the population. Yet, for all its turmoil, Atlanta Penitentiary was also a place where inmates formed complex networks of loyalty and survival. Trust was a rare currency, earned slowly and lost quickly. Groups formed not only for protection but for emotional stability. A shared meal, a quiet conversation in the yard, or a moment of laughter became lifelines in a place designed to suppress individuality. These small pockets of humanity kept many men from collapsing under the psychological burden. Staff members, too, felt the weight of the institution's history. Many worked shifts filled with unpredictability, torn between enforcing order and managing the emotional temperature of hundreds of men living under stress. Some officers admitted that the prison's atmosphere changed them, making them more guarded, more reactive, sometimes more hardened. Others described developing a deep sense of empathy as they witnessed firsthand the mental toll that incarceration can place on the human mind. The Atlanta Federal Penitentiary remains a symbol of how history, architecture, and institutional pressure shape the psychology of everyone inside. Its past is not simply a list of riots and escape attempts. It is a reflection of what happens when confinement, unrest, and resilience collide. Even today, its story continues to influence how people understand the complexities of survival within America's toughest prisons. The alarm screamed through the corridors of Atlanta Penitentiary, bouncing off the cold concrete walls like a predator's growl. Inmates stirred from their bunks, tattoos catching the flicker of the emergency lights, orange jumpsuits glowing in the harsh teal-amber shadows. Marcus, no, Not Marcus this time, but Leon Hayes, a towering figure with inked arms tracing stories of past survival, stood motionless for a heartbeat, listening. The chaos was orchestrated, deliberate. He knew each sound, each footstep, each pause. Somewhere deep inside, a plan had begun months ago, buried beneath layers of routine and compliance, and now it was ready to surface. Through the narrow hallways of San Quentin, the scene mirrored its West Coast counterpart. Cells rattled as guards barked orders, and inmates, strategically positioned, mirrored every movement with subtle defiance. A faint tapping echoed through the vents, a secret Morse code transmitting instructions and warnings. Hayes' hand hovered over the metal chip he had been crafting in secret, the one that carried messages of coordination across blocks. The prison had always sought control, yet it was their overconfidence that became the very thread of vulnerability. Each tap, each whisper, each carefully timed step reinforced a collective awareness, a shared pulse of rebellion that no surveillance camera could fully capture. In the yard of Atlanta, sunlight tried to penetrate the tall fences, but the shadows cast by the barbed wire created an illusion of permanent dusk. Inmates moved in seemingly mundane routines, washing, walking, conversing, but their glances were calculated, each nod a signal, each scratch on the walls a code. The prison staff watched, unaware of the invisible choreography unfolding before their eyes. In Hayes' cell, a small opening above the vent allowed him to slide his notes to other trusted prisoners, the inked patterns on their arms visible in the dim light, their gestures silent but potent. Every piece of paper carried fragments of strategy, fragments of hope. Even in isolation, even under constant surveillance, communication thrived. The walls could hold bodies, but they could not entirely hold minds. Night fell heavy and fast over San Quentin, the flickering fluorescent lights turning halls into an eerie tunnel of shifting shadows. Hayes crouched near the cell bars, eyes sharp and calculating, as distant shouts punctuated the night. From another block, tapping and clanging began again, echoing like a rhythm that only the initiated could understand. Here, rebellion was not violent outburst but precision, a psychological play against the system. Guards were reacting to noise and shadows, misled by movement and timing, while the real coordination was hidden in the silence, in the pauses, in the eyes that met across iron barriers. Tattoos, once seen as mere decoration, now acted as identifiers, subtle signals to those who knew the language of survival and resistance. In Atlanta, a solitary figure moved quietly along the red line that had been painted across the floor as part of the new experimental program within the penitentiary. Hayes' counterpart, a wiry man named Dante Cruz, followed it, a metal tray in hand, ostensibly performing routine chores. But the tray concealed coded papers, messages of caution, and fragments of strategy. He navigated with care, every footstep measured, every glance deliberate. The prison's electronic eyes captured only fragments, unaware of the full picture forming beneath their lenses. Across blocks, patterns emerged, coordinated timings, controlled chaos designed to disorient the authority while maintaining absolute control over their own movements. The psychology of confinement was being subtly inverted. Prisoners, long considered subjects, were becoming actors, manipulating the system from within. As midnight approached, the quiet tension of San Quentin's blocks was pierced by a sudden blackout. Lights failed, emergency lamps flickered, and shadows merged into a uniform darkness. In the chaos, Hayes moved calmly, every tattooed arm and shoulder visible in the faint glow of exit lights, his expression unreadable. Fellow inmates responded with silent acknowledgement, following the choreography they had rehearsed in whispered exchanges. The blackout was a test, and they were ready. Guards struggled to account for movement, relying on protocols that had been subverted by predictable compliance. In this controlled turmoil, control itself became an illusion, a fragile construct ready to crumble under the weight of collective awareness. Morning brought no relief. In Atlanta's mess hall, the inmates gathered under the guise of meal routines. Plates clattered, and rhythmic banging on metal surfaces began again, seemingly random but part of a broader cadence. The sound carried through vents and corridors, disorienting staff, while conveying precise instructions to those who knew how to listen. Tattoos glinted in the teal-amber light, arms raised and lowered in subtle coordination. The rebellion was not about destruction. It was about survival, intelligence, and the reclamation of agency. Even small victories, like coordinating movement or delivering a single message, felt monumental in a system designed to erase individuality. San Quentin mirrored this tension, the old walls reverberating with unspoken defiance. Inmates exchanged glances, notes slid through vents, and a rhythm of subtle disruption pulsed through the facility. Hayes watched carefully, noting which guards faltered, which protocols could be bent, and which inmates could carry responsibility. Every day, every interaction, became a layer of the broader strategy. The psychology of fear was repurposed. What had been tools of oppression were now instruments of coordinated awareness. In these moments, the true resilience of the human mind was on display, not through violence, but through meticulous, collective intelligence. By the time dawn broke, the prisons were quiet again, but the residue of the night lingered. In Atlanta, messages had moved, patterns observed, and unspoken hierarchies reinforced. In San Quentin, a similar dance of power and psychology had played out, invisible to those who measured authority in keys and cuffs. Hayes, in the corner of his cell, allowed himself a brief sigh, the inked skin of his arms reflecting the faint glow of early light. There was no cheer, no victory lap, only the calm satisfaction of having navigated a labyrinth of control and emerged intact, with strategy preserved and minds unbroken. The rebellion had succeeded not through overt chaos, but through precision, awareness, and subtle defiance. The prisons would continue their routines, and the systems of control would tighten once more, but the subtle threads of rebellion, of agency, of mental survival, had been woven deeply into the daily rhythm. Hayes and his companions understood the most critical lesson. Control is never absolute, and the human spirit, even within walls of steel and stone, finds a way to assert itself. The shadows of Atlanta and San Quentin remained long, the echoes of calculated defiance lingering, a quiet testament to resilience, strategy, and the untold stories that never fully appear on the official records. And so, as the sun climbed higher, the inmates returned to their routines, the guards to their rounds, and the walls held bodies, but not the full measure of the human mind. Somewhere deep inside, freedom persisted, not in the absence of confinement, but in the ability to think, to communicate, and to resist. The prisons had been challenged, subtly and intelligently, and the story, like the shadows on the walls, was only partially revealed to those who could truly see it. The first hints of dawn cast weak light across the jagged rooftops of Atlanta Penitentiary. The night's chaos had receded, leaving silence thick as dust in the hallways. Inmates stirred cautiously, tattoos tracing histories of survival, arms shifting beneath bright orange jumpsuits that seemed almost fluorescent against the gray concrete. Hayes moved slowly, eyes scanning every shadow, every corner where authority might still linger unseen. The previous night had been a test, a proving ground for patience and coordination, and now the aftermath demanded vigilance. In San Quentin, the story was mirrored. The historic walls, thick and unyielding, seemed to pulse with the ghosts of past defiance. Inmates, careful not to attract attention, retrieved small notes left in vents, exchanged subtle signals, and moved in quiet synchrony through the dim corridors. What had been rehearsed in whispers and small gestures became routine, yet the weight of risk was ever present. A flicker of fluorescent light revealed the tattoos on their arms, necks, and hands, silent markers of identity, experience, and allegiance. Even in a system designed to strip individuality, the human spirit found ways to leave its mark. By mid-morning, the penitentiaries resumed their structured rhythms, but the residue of subtle rebellion lingered. Guards conducted their rounds, unaware of the psychological maneuvers executed under their watch. Meals were served, counts conducted, doors locked and unlocked, and the heavy clang of metal echoed through the empty corridors. Hayes observed, noting the patterns, the small victories that were invisible to official logs. Each inmate carried their own story of endurance, small acts of clever defiance hidden beneath the routine. It was a quiet revolution, one that left no bruises but demonstrated control could always be challenged. In the yards, the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows over the fences and concrete. The barbed wire, meant to contain, only highlighted the lengths to which these men had adapted. Conversations were minimal, eyes sharp, movements deliberate. Small victories, like passing messages undetected or coordinating subtle timing of activities, reinforced an invisible network of awareness and trust. The system believed it measured compliance, yet it had merely become the stage for a deeper psychological game. The prisoners were no longer just subjects. They were players in a calculated dance of survival and influence. As afternoon settled, Hayes and his companions reflected quietly. The day's successes were not grandiose, but monumental in their impact. They had learned to navigate the relentless surveillance, the strict rules, and the constant threat of punishment. Yet through strategy, subtlety, and cooperation, they had reclaimed fragments of autonomy. In both Atlanta and San Quentin, the psychological landscape of confinement had been subtly altered. Control was not entirely theirs, and never would be. Even the most experienced administrators could not anticipate every thought, every small act of ingenuity, every coded message whispered through vents and shadowed hallways. And as the sun dipped low, casting golden hues over the steel and concrete, a final truth emerged. The human mind remains untamed even within walls designed to contain it. Hayes watched as the shadows stretched across the cells, tattoos glinting in the muted light, orange jumpsuits marking bodies but not spirits. In these historic and modern halls, resilience persisted, cleverness flourished, and hope, quiet, careful, enduring, survived. The story of Atlanta Penitentiary and San Quentin did not end with bricks and bars. It ended with the recognition that even in confinement, the mind remains free. The prisons would continue to operate, routines enforced, rules maintained, yet the subtle victories of intelligence, coordination, and defiance remained invisible. Freedom existed not in the absence of confinement, but in the assertion of self within it. And so, the inmates returned to their routines, the guards to theirs, and life within the walls continued, an unbroken testament to endurance, strategy, and the untold human stories that persist behind every locked door. If you enjoy real, gripping prison documentaries and true stories, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with your friends and family. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss more shocking and exclusive content.